Hello, everyone. This is Lord Artorius Collbrande, and today's topic, I was planning to talk about a game that I was anticipating really for like about a year, and I was thinking to myself, this game is actually pretty disappointing. I was expecting it to be a really good game, but I just kind of want to get my thoughts out there and just talk about my perspective on this new Tales game that was released. As you could, already obviously tell, I named myself after one of the Tales characters, Artorius, and he's from one of my favorite games, Tales of Berseria. But today we're going to be talking about a new game that came out, and I was hoping that this was going to be a really good game, but I actually ended up being disappointed because even though I do think that this game had some good qualities to it, which we'll discuss a little bit, I feel like in some ways, because the story in this game wasn't really that great, and because some of the characters were bad, and because I feel like some things in the gameplay were mediocre, and the fact that this game didn't even really feel entirely like a normal Tales game, but didn't actually change anything for like a better purpose, led me to believe that this was a disappointing game. Now, you may be kind of wondering to yourself, why do I personally think the story in this game is disappointing? Well, normally when I like to talk about like stories sometimes my favorite characters are normally the villains, because I like to think about how cool and badass they are and how interesting and well developed, and being able to sometimes even sympathize with the characters. Sometimes I think that's actually really cool. And I feel like, with Tales of Symphonia Dawn of the New World and Tales of Berseria, by just only mentioning those two games because I'm comparing them, I believe that those games actually succeed at that because they actually knew how to write characters that you could actually sympathize with. I feel like in Berseria, I was able to sympathize with Artorius because they actually developed his backstory, and you actually saw that he was deeply upset, and was hiding those emotions because of the fact that his own wife and his own unborn child were killed during the first Scarlet Night. And I also thought that Richter from Dawn of the New World was also sympathetic because with his arc as a character, you actually learn his reasons for why he wanted to get rid of Lord Ratatosk and, in his mind, save the world. And it's also tied with the fact that with Richter, he also had feelings for his friend Aster and wanted revenge for his death. To be honest with you, in Tales of Arise, the biggest problem with the villains in this game was the fact that every single villain is just portrayed as some evil, over-the-top asshole, and they really have nothing interesting about them. And to me, I feel like that's incredibly underwhelming and just isn't cool. Starting off with the first villain named Balsef, who I personally call Ballsack because it's a ridiculous name. And I personally think that it's hard to honestly take seriously, that he's even like considered a villain in this game. Many of the problems, in this game kind of stem from the prologue being a bit too fast-paced, and I thought it was done with, like, too quickly. You have a bit of plot holes, like how it's never really mentioned or shown how Shion really, obtained the fire core, and with the main character Alphen, he just like takes that out of her eventually in the prologue, and it's just used to help fight Balsac, and they just freaking beat him, and he's just dead. And what kind of baffles me about all this is that even Shion even calls out the fact that, like, seriously, the characters themselves are actually aware of how stupid some of the story in this game actually is. Shion actually even literally calls out the fact that they didn't even really know much about him, yet they killed Balsif. But here's the thing. The whole premise of the story really is set with the idea that the Renans rule over the Danans, and the Danans are slaves to the Renans. So this is like a driving thing that motivates these two main characters to like basically just beat the bad guys and just win. Kind of what makes this a weak prologue is just really the fact that it just feels too fast-paced. It feels like, you're just done with it. You're done with, like, a villain who's, like, supposed to be, like, an important part of the story, really, because when you kind of think about it, it just feels like it's just rushed, and you're not actually spending enough time actually developing the characters. And this becomes a big problem throughout the whole game. And each and every single villain follows this issue. And, it also really comes ahead to the main villain, Vholran, who's the mysterious man. But we'll talk about him at extending length soon, because I kind of want to just quickly go over the other villains and just talk about who their names are. Ganabel is the second villain. Dol Halim was another character that they ended up facing, but he wasn't even a bad guy, and he actually joins your party to help actually get rid of the other lords and fight them. And then, you have really your third villain being, the third villain is actually revealed to be Kelzelik, who's like Dohalim's like advisor. But whatever happened with him after, like, it was just kind of revealed, he was revealed as a villain, is kind of a mystery. It was never actually, like, presented well. But kind of just moving on, I feel like the next villain after that was Almadria, and that's kind of also where we get to, like, some other problems with the story, because I feel like she was just kind of killed off too quickly also herself. And the fact that we didn't even really get to hear another side of what the Renans were doing from her perspective, because Vholran just killed her off, is kind of lame. Now, there is a bit of positives the story has in this game, like I did mention, with a bit of common sense from the characters. It kind of just, like, holds it together only a little bit. But when you think about, like, the way how it just writes its villains, the story's really not that great. And even the main characters are kind of bland. Like, they're not really that interesting of characters, even though they do toss around a few interesting mysteries about them every now and then. And I feel like that's really a letdown, because, this game did have some potential in some ways, but it ended up, like, feeling completely, like, wasted in some areas, and that was disappointing. But really the worst character in this entire game was literally the main antagonist, Vholran. Throughout the whole game, he's just someone who really just shows off a little bit, and it was no surprise to me that he was, like, one of the bad guys at all. The first scene that we even see this guy is that the fact that he actually literally just takes down a bunch of wolves in Cislodia, and that's just to kind of show him off a little bit. But I feel like that gives me a bad taste, because it feels like they're not really putting much effort into really making him a cool, interesting character, and rather just kind of shoving down that he's just trying to show off as, oh, he's like this super powerful character or whatever, and we're supposed to like care. And, what kind of like staggers me a little bit is the fact that the next scene after that he's shown in is literally when he like beats the crap out of all the characters, and he literally just freaking doesn't even kill anyone, and he just like goes away and just basically just does the anime trope of, oh, even though we're trying to like beat these guys, we're not going to actually kill them because we actually need them for the plot later on. And it all kind of leads down also to this whole thing, and like at the end of the first half of the game, when you face him and you just literally end up kicking his ass. Like, after a 2-phase boss battle with this guy, he just ends up getting stabbed in the gut, and he literally is defeated already. And it feels really underwhelming. It made me kind of question at first, really, that this was really the ending of the game, because it feels like they didn't actually plan well with its villains at all. Like, you see what I mean? Like, the fact that they're not really that interesting of characters, and the fact that they're not even really powerful or even cool or anything really redeeming about them, is what puts this game down. It really kind of just drains down the experience, which is kind of honestly a letdown and really a shame, because even though this game, sucks in some ways, I feel like there are some good things and some positives in this game that were actually executed well, like the environments in this game, for example, as well, like, as something really positive. I'll give the game this. At least Tales of Arise was able to design some of the greatest environmental looks I've ever seen in this entire franchise. And that's no joke, especially after the first half of the game, and when you enter the second half, when you explore Lenegus and see outer space, and it looks really cool. The way how they like gave detail into like some of these environments, which I wish I could show you, is outstanding. And they do a great job with it. But unfortunately, even though like things like the final dungeon in this game, which also looks really badass and cool, because you see like this huge light like literally shooting from like beneath an entire planet, and it looks really cool. Even though you have cool stuff like that in this game, it just feels really underwhelming that many of the villains in this game, all the villains in this game, suck ass. And that, to me, is really a letdown. But I think I mentioned at the beginning of the video, if I'm not mistaken, that the biggest problem with like literally all the antagonists is the fact that they actually try to sell you being able to sympathize with the characters, except for the fact that really, in all honesty, they just kill them off, and we're not actually seeing much development with them. And the game is even aware of this a little bit, because not all the characters are completely terrible. Like, they do have a little bit where, they have a bit of moments, like when they were on the boat and when they were talking about, like, some things that happened in the past and how it kind of made them grow a bit as characters a little bit. I mean, a few moments in the game, were fine, and I was at least appreciating that there was a little bit of intelligence sometimes from the characters, but it wasn't really enough to actually fix what was really wrong with the story. And that I found really disappointing. unfortunately. And it really hurts me to say that, because I wanted to really have this game as game of the year, honestly. I was really hoping that this would be a great game this year in 2021, because I don't really anticipate like too much stuff. I mean, I mean like I don't, look, I mean like I see a lot of things, but there's only a limited amount of things that I'm actually legitimately excited for. And this was the one game this year I actually expected to be great, but unfortunately it wasn't. And even though this game wasn't terrible, it was just mediocre. And it was a really mixed bag, because it wasn't a really bad game, but some things kind of really disappointed me, and I was definitely really not a fan of a few things in this game. There's only like one time where we get to see even literally anything where the other characters are like given, a way to even be sympathized with. And it's when you're on Lenegus and you're just doing this side quest where you just talk to 5 random strangers who, honestly, I don't even know how they would even know these characters, really, because nothing is really even shown well. And you're just expected to believe there's like an entire different side of these characters, even though they're just all evil assholes. And I'm sitting in my couch and I'm thinking to myself, like, come on, dude. I mean, that's not how you write sympathetic characters. As I already compared to like other characters in this franchise that I really like by comparison, Tales of Arise just really fails at grasping this idea and just doesn't understand what it is to really grow different sides to its own antagonists. And it fails in that area tremendously. With Vholran, there's also another problem with his character, at the fact that, even though I do think there was a little bit of potential in developing his past, they don't actually really show what he was even like past 300 years ago. And this is literally during also the part where they're literally like in Lenegus, in these like research facilities, and they're actually trying to look for the past of like what actually happened and where everything really came from and what really resulted in, the Danans being enslaved. But they don't even develop the fact that, like, both Alphen and Vholran were chosen as sovereigns, but there was never even any interactions between these two characters 300 years ago. And I think that would have actually been an interesting idea, because it actually would have made the final encounter between these two characters a lot more interesting. But unfortunately, because the game is a bit poorly written, definitely poorly written with its antagonists, it feels really underwhelming, and it becomes extremely disappointing at the very end of the whole game. And that was very unfortunate for me, because I really wanted to like this game, but unfortunately I couldn't say that I really liked it that much. It was just really only a mixed bag for a JRPG. And that's really disappointing. Which is why I personally think that this is, honestly, in my point of view, the most disappointing game of the entire year. It's not the worst game of the year. It's just disappointing. It's not one of the best games of 2021, in my opinion. I mean, I don't have a best game of 2021. I haven't actually played a lot of games that were made this year and actually released this year. But I can at least tell you my thoughts on this game. It is disappointing. I think that, once I saw the final encounter with Vholran, it felt like they were just shoving one last moment with him down our throats, and we were just supposed to fight him at the end. Even though he was just really just tossed all over the place, his entire arc was stupid and really made no sense. His whole motivation is literally based on the fact that he was, he was actually revealed that he was actually once a damned slave himself when they fight the Red Women in the Hell Ganquil, which is what they're really called. And I'm just thinking to myself for a second. It's revealed that, he was a Danon slave, but my whole question is, why didn't he ever question Renan authority over them? Like, he basically did all of his own work to basically enslave his own kind of people and basically have tolerance for the fact that it had not much of an issue and treated better to the fact that the real people who are actually Renans, the Hell Ganquil, who are really the masterminds behind everything, and the Great Spirit, who was also really behind everything, they were just kind of given a free pass by him. And I don't understand how a character can be so poorly written. It honestly astonishes me how bad of a character Vholran actually is. Because he honestly actually likes the idea of being racist to his own kind of people, but yet, just let, other people just do whatever they want to them, I guess. It doesn't really make any sense, and it's incomprehensible. And once you also, finish him off, it just feels like, nothing really. Because it feels like they didn't really build to his final moment where it felt actually epic and really deserved to be taken seriously as a real moment in the game. But the final nail in the whole coffin for the story, for me, was what they actually did with the Great Spirit. I won't go into too much detail like I did with Vholran, but I hated the Great Spirit also because I feel like with that thing, which is like a monster on the Renan planet, they try to sell the fact that these characters, they actually had good intentions somehow. They didn't have evil intentions, even though it's actually revealed that they enslaved Danons to actually artificially create a Renan society, to actually have everyone as slaves. That's ridiculous. The fact that we're trying to justify someone's motive because they just want to live. The Great Spirit just wants to live. Hey, here's actually a thought. Why don't we just literally just freaking take random people, just turn them into slaves because we need to live. Our way to actually gain life isn't to take care of ourselves or anything like that. It's to literally be selfish, take all the energy that you can get and literally just be a complete asshole to literally anyone who isn't your own kind of people, just because you need to live. That's how you actually prevent yourself from dying. How do you look at that and sympathize with the characters from that point of view? That's ridiculous. And the fact that, the game, actually sells that is beyond my comprehension, really. I also think that, in the main party, I think it was kind of annoying that Rinwell and Law, had like this like immature relationship, and it didn't really develop that well. But I won't really go too far into the other characters because I think I've been ranting long enough, and I think you kind of get the point of why I dislike the story so much. Well, not so much, because there are a few good parts. It's not an awful story. It's just not really good. It's just below average. And it has a lot of problems from the fact that it does such a bad job handling any of its antagonists. And that sucks. And you need a good antagonist to pilot the story, to create stakes, to have the characters grow against something and actually learn. Those are the stakes that your characters face. And I also thought it was disappointing how at the end, the way that Alphen just found a way to save Shion from her own thorns, which, by the way, is a curse because she's actually revealed to be immortal. He just literally like stabs her flower and just saves her, and then everyone just ends up having a happy ending that's generic, and that's just the ending of the game, which honestly, by the way, was also the worst ending I've probably ever seen in a video game. It might actually be even worse than Mass Effect 3's ending, which, by the way, was also a really bad ending in a game. And that is quite a shame, because I expected more from this game. I expected Tales of Arise to be a great game with a great story, but it didn't live up to that promise. And that's why I feel like this game is disappointing. Now, you might just be wondering why I feel like this game doesn't really feel like a Tales game, but I'll just quickly go over that so that way this video isn't really too long. I know that I've been ranting quite a bit, and I think you get my points. It starts off really small with the fact that, you don't see victory animations like you do in other Tales games, and I think that's a bit disappointing. And you don't see the letter Z on like the owls and stuff like that, kind of like how other Tales games did with like cats and cows and stuff like that. They would have like the letter Z. Now, normally those would really be nitpicks and not really be like any like really harsh criticisms. But I feel like they become bigger problems when you realize also that they aren't really the only issue in the whole game that makes this unlike a real Tales game. There's also the fact that you can't even equip titles on your characters. And I noticed that. Like, that's not really like what a Tales game is. And I feel like that's, also another thing that adds to why this game is disappointing. Because even though I don't really mind changing a franchise that much, as long as it's like a good change. But I feel like this game was just taking away stuff and didn't really make, it just didn't really make sense for the game to really do. There's also like weird recipes, like, the way, I love burgers, but the way how they like create a recipe for that is kind of weird. Like, they describe it as like ground beef, but you actually use sheep meat to actually make it a burger, and they don't even consider it meat. Like, they just have it in the other category, and it just doesn't really make sense to me. Like, okay, that's kind of weird. And there's also like the fact that you like literally use eggs to make ice cream in this game, which is also like a recipe in this game. I think I've made my points about why I feel like this game is disappointing. I feel like it's not, awful. And I'm sure I'm probably missing a few things, that aren't really at the top of my head. I'm sure I could probably come up with a couple more things, but I think, since this video is long enough, I think I've made my points. This game is disappointing. I expected more from it, and I feel really bad that this game wasn't really that great. I'm sure I could have made this video literally 5 hours long, dissecting every little part of the game, but I'd rather do that one day if when one day I could actually produce a higher quality video actually talking about this game at a greater length. This is probably my least favorite Tales game. I played like 5 games now in this franchise, and I've been a big Tales fan for a while now. Ever since I was, in high school, early on when I was 14 years old. But you know what? This game's disappointing. It doesn't have a really good story. I feel like the combat is mediocre. I haven't really gone over the combat, but I'm not going to really talk about it much. I feel like the boss fights, they're either too hard or too easy, I do feel like the art system is a bit bland, but I'm not really going to go over that. If you have anything to talk about with me regarding that, feel free to say anything in the comment section. I'll be happy to respond. But that's going to be the end of the video. Thank you for hearing my perspective. And I'd like to hear what your thoughts on this game were. Did you agree with me and thought it was also a disappointment? Did you really hate it? A little bit more than I think that, kind of whatever. Or did you disagree with me and did you actually really like this game? I'm really curious. If I had to give it a final rating, I would probably give it like a 4 out of 10. Maybe. I'm not really entirely sure about my rating right at this second, but I think for now, my final rating is going to be a 4 out of 10. Unless if I change it in the future. But for now, I'm just thinking about what a disappointment this game was this year. And I feel like it doesn't deserve, some of the credit that it's actually getting, being called the best Tales game ever made. Because I know for a fact that from what I've, I know in my perspective, and this is my opinion, I personally believe that there were better Tales games than this. And I can tell you as someone who's played some of the other games. And that's just what I think. But thank you for hearing me out. I really appreciate, all the strong-willed people out there who are at least able to hear a different perspective if you disagreed with me. Or just, getting my thoughts out there and just talking about the game. Not even, disagreeing with some of the people, just disagreeing with some of the people. Because that doesn't really entirely matter. What matters is that this was just my opinion. I just wanted to share it with you guys. Thank you, and I hope you have a great day. Signing out.